The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a crystal cathedral. Thousands of seats rose in perfect circles around the central speaking platform. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, making the air itself seem to glow. Today, like every other day for the past 3 years, Ambassador Deho walked to the center podium with careful steps. His black suit was perfect. His tie was straight. His smile was exactly the right size, not too big, not too small. Behind him, his aide Mira carried a small data pad and watched everything with sharp eyes. She had learned to notice things that others missed. The council members looked down at them from their high seats. Each species had their own section. The Vorthok Empire sat in the eastern wing, huge bug-like creatures with sharp claws and eyes that never blinked. Their bodies were covered in dark green shells, and when they moved, it sounded like metal scraping against stone. In the western section sat the Ethereal Collective. They looked like ghosts made of light, floating in the air instead of sitting in chairs. When they spoke, their voices came from everywhere at once, like music played through the walls. They thought they were better than everyone else because they had given up physical bodies long ago. The Silicon hegemony took up the northern wing. They were not alive in the way most beings understood life. Instead, they were living crystals that grew and changed shape. Their leader was a tall tower of blue crystal that pulsed with inner light. They spoke in mathematical formulas and cared only about profit and efficiency. There were dozens of other species in the chamber. Some breathed air, some breathed water, and some did not breathe at all, but they all shared one thing. They looked at humans like adults look at children who think they understand the world. Deho reached the center platform and activated the speaking system. His voice carried clearly to every corner of the massive room. "Honored council members," he began, his tone warm and respectful. "I thank you for allowing humanity to present our request today." A low rumble came from the Vorthok section. War Prime Khazgul, their representative, shifted in his seat. His voice was like grinding metal when he spoke. "Get on with it, human. We have important matters to discuss after you are done." Mira's hand tightened slightly on her datapad, but her face showed nothing. She had been keeping track of these insults for 3 years now. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every time they were treated like annoying children instead of equals. Deho's smile never wavered. "Of course, War Prime. I will be brief." He touched a control on the podium and a holographic display appeared above his head. It showed star maps and shipping routes. "Humanity respectfully requests permission to establish mining operations in the Kepler 442 system. Our surveys show significant mineral deposits that would benefit not just humanity, but all council members through increased trade." The display was beautiful and detailed. It showed exactly which asteroids they wanted to mine, what resources they contained, and how the profits would be shared with the council. Humanity had spent months preparing this presentation. Councillor Veltar of the Ethereal Collective responded first. Her voice seemed to come from the air itself, musical and condescending. "Oh, how adorable," she said, and other council members made sounds that might have been laughter. "The little humans want to expand their territory again." Prime Unit 7 of the Silicon hegemony flickered with what passed for amusement among their kind. Query: Does this species not understand the concept of designated zones? Calculation: Humans have been assigned appropriate space for their development level. Deho nodded as if he had just heard helpful advice instead of an insult. "We understand the Council's wisdom in these matters. However, our population is growing, and we believe we have demonstrated responsible stewardship of our current territories." War Prime Khazgul made a sound like grinding gears. "Responsible? You have been members of this council for barely 3 years. Some of us have been here for thousands of years. You think 3 years makes you ready for expansion? We do not presume to know better than the council," Deho replied smoothly. "We simply ask for the opportunity to contribute more to the galactic community." Mira watched the council members exchange glances. She had seen this pattern before. They were not considering humanity's request seriously. They had already decided to refuse, just like they refused every human request for expansion, for better trade routes, for equal treatment. The Ethereal Collective member spoke again. "Perhaps in another century or two, when humanity has learned patience and wisdom, we might consider such requests. For now, you should focus on managing what you have been given." Other council members nodded or made their species equivalent of agreement. The Aquatic Federation's representative, a creature that lived in a water-filled tank, bubbled something that the translation system rendered as premature ambition. The Hive Collective's thousand-eyed speaker clicked in what might have been approval. Deho stood quietly for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back. Mira knew this posture well. He was thinking, calculating, choosing his words carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was just as polite as before. "I understand the Council's position," he said. "We are, as you say, still young as a galactic species. We appreciate your guidance and look forward to proving ourselves worthy of your trust." He bowed slightly. Not too deep, not too shallow. Just enough to show respect without showing submission. "We thank the Council for their time and wisdom. We will continue to work hard to earn our place among you." War Prime Kuzgul waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Good. Perhaps next time you will come with more realistic requests." As Deho and Mira left the platform, the council members were already moving on to other business. They talked about trade disputes between species humanity had never heard of, about territorial conflicts in distant galaxies, about matters they considered too important for human ears. Walking back to their assigned seating area, Mira leaned close to Deho and whispered, "The mineral survey data was perfect. The profit projections were generous to them. There was no reasonable basis for refusal." Deho nodded slightly but said nothing. His smile remained in place, but Mira noticed something in his eyes that had not been there before. Something cold and calculating, something that made her remember that before becoming a diplomat, Deho had been something else entirely. They took their seats in the small section reserved for humanity, tucked away in a corner like an afterthought. As the council continued with their important business, Mira opened her datapad and added today's refusal to her growing list. Beside her, Deho sat perfectly still, perfectly polite, perfectly respectful. But for just a moment, when he thought no one was looking, his smile had disappeared entirely. 3 months had passed since the last council meeting. The Great Chamber looked the same as always, but today felt different. Emergency sessions were rare, called only when something truly serious had happened. Deho stood at the center podium again, but this time his perfect posture seemed forced. His hands gripped the edges of the speaking platform just a little too tightly. Behind him, Mira held her datapad with shaking fingers. Her usually neat hair was slightly messy, and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. Next to her stood a new face, Hyunwoo, a military liaison who had arrived from Earth just 2 days ago. His uniform was crisp and clean, but his jaw was clenched so tight that the muscles stood out like cables. "Honored council members," Deho began, his voice carrying the same respectful tone as always. But Mira could hear the strain underneath it. "I thank you for calling this emergency session. Humanity requests immediate assistance with a crisis situation." The council members settled into their seats with the lazy movements of beings who were not particularly concerned. War Prime Kuzgul of the Vorthak Empire cleaned his claws with obvious boredom. The Ethereal Collective's representative floated in slow, peaceful circles. Prime Unit 7 of the Silicon Hegemony pulsed with steady, uninterested light. Deho touched the control panel and a holographic display appeared above his head. It showed a star map of the Kepler 442 system, the same system humanity had requested permission to mine just 3 months ago. But now, instead of showing mineral deposits and trade routes, it showed something else entirely. 5 days ago, the civilian transport ship Soul's Pride disappeared while traveling through this system, Deho continued. His voice remained steady, professional. The ship was carrying 50,000 human civilians, including 15,000 families with children. They were moving to establish a new colony in the Tau Ceti system, with full council approval and documentation. The hologram zoomed in to show the ship's planned route. It was a safe path, far from any known dangers, following established shipping lanes that had been used for decades. Soul's Pride had been equipped with the best navigation systems humanity could build. It was not the kind of ship that simply got lost. The ship's last transmission was received at 14:30 Galactic Standard Time on the 5th day of this month, Deho said. The message stated that all systems were functioning normally. Then silence. Councillor Veltar of the Ethereal Collective made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "How unfortunate," she said, her voice carrying no more emotion than if she were commenting on the weather. Space travel has always carried risks. Perhaps this young species should consider staying closer to home until they develop better navigation technology. Mira's grip on her datapad tightened until her knuckles went white. 50,000 people dead or missing, and the Council's response was to suggest that humans were too stupid to travel safely. Deho nodded politely, as if he had just received helpful advice. We understand the risks of space travel, Counselor. However, we believe something unusual may have occurred. Our deep space monitoring stations detected energy signatures consistent with weapons fire in the area around the time of the disappearance. This statement caused a small stir among the Council members. Not concern exactly, but interest. War Prime Kazgul leaned forward in his seat, his compound eyes gleaming. Weapons fire, he said, his voice like metal scraping against stone. How interesting. What kind of weapons fire? Deho hesitated for just a moment. Mira noticed it, even if no one else did. Our analysis suggests plasma cannons of the type commonly used by Vorthak military vessels, he said carefully. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the constant background hum of the air recycling system seemed to quiet. War Prime Kazgul's expression did not change, but his claws extended slightly from their sheaths. Are you accusing the Vorthak Empire of attacking a civilian vessel? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Deho raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. Not at all, War Prime. I am simply sharing the data we have collected. We hope the Council might help us understand what happened. Prime Unit 7 of the Silicon Hegemony flickered rapidly, which was their species' equivalent of clearing their throat. Query: what specific assistance does humanity require? We request permission to conduct a full search and rescue operation in the Kepler 442 system, Deho replied. We also ask for any information Council members might have about recent activity in that area. The Council members looked at each other with the slow, deliberate movements of beings who were not particularly interested in helping. War Prime Kazgul was the first to speak. Now that you mention it, he said casually, our cleansing patrol did pass through that system recently. We were hunting pirates and found some debris, nothing important. He paused, examining his claws, though I suppose it could have been from a human vessel. Hard to tell once plasma cannons have done their work. The words hung in the air like poison. Mira felt her stomach drop. Yunwu took a half-step forward before catching himself. Deho stood perfectly still, but something in his posture had changed. The respectful diplomat was still there, but underneath it something else was stirring. Debris, Deho repeated quietly. Yes, War Prime Kazgul said with obvious satisfaction. Quite a lot of it, actually. We assumed it was pirate vessels that had been properly dealt with. The Vorthak Empire does not tolerate criminal activity in our patrol zones. Counselor Veltar floated serenely in her section. How tragic that the human vessel was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Perhaps this is a lesson about the dangers of unauthorized expansion into contested space. The Kepler 442 system is not contested space, Yunwu said, speaking for the first time. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. It is designated as neutral territory under Council regulations. Prime Unit 7 pulsed with calculated amusement. Calculation. Search and rescue operations in that region would be economically inefficient. Statistical analysis. 50,000 individuals represent 0.001% of human population. Resource expenditure not justified. The chamber erupted in what passed for laughter among the various species. The Aquatic Federation's representative bubbled with amusement. The Hive Collective's thousand eyes blinked in synchronized patterns of mirth. Even the normally serious Rock Collective made grinding sounds that might have been chuckling. Deho stood at the center of it all, listening to aliens laugh about the deaths of 50,000 humans. His hands remained steady on the podium. His voice remained calm when he spoke. I understand the Council's position, he said. The loss is statistically insignificant. Mira stared at him. In 3 years of working together, she had never heard him speak like that. His tone was still respectful, still diplomatic, but the words themselves were wrong somehow. We will handle this matter internally, Deho continued. Thank you for your time and wisdom. He bowed slightly, the same precise bow he had given hundreds of times before. But as he straightened, Mira caught something in his expression that made her blood run cold. For just a moment, the mask of perfect diplomacy had slipped, and what she saw underneath was not grief or sadness. It was rage, cold, calculating, patient rage. As they left the speaking platform, War Prime Kazgul called after them. Next time, keep your civilians in safer space, humans. The galaxy can be a dangerous place for those who do not know their limits. Deho stopped walking. For a long moment, he stood perfectly still. Then he turned back to face the Vorthak representative. We will remember that advice, he said softly. Thank you. The words were polite. The tone was respectful. But Mira had spent 3 years learning to read the subtle signs of her ambassador's moods, and what she heard in those simple words made her start planning their immediate departure from the council chambers. As they walked back to their seats, Mira noticed that Deho had stopped saying please and thank you in his usual way. The words were still there, but they sounded different now, like weapons being loaded. Hyunwoo leaned close to both of them as they sat down. I need to send a message to Earth, he whispered urgently. Deho nodded once. Send it, he said quietly. Tell them it is time. Mira did not ask what it meant. She was not sure she wanted to know. Captain Jinsu had been floating in the darkness between stars for 6 hours. His ship, the Busan Shadow, was completely invisible. No lights, no heat signatures, no energy readings. To any scanning equipment, this part of space was empty. That was exactly what he wanted. The Kepler 442 system spread out before him like a handful of jewels scattered on black cloth. The star burned bright and steady in the center, surrounded by planets and asteroids that had been spinning in their orbits for billions of years. It looked peaceful. It looked empty. It was neither. Scan complete, Captain, reported Lieutenant So-young from her position at the sensor station. Her voice was barely above a whisper, even though no one could hear them in the vacuum of space. I have found the debris field. Jinsu moved to stand behind her station. The main screen showed a 3-dimensional map of the system, with thousands of tiny red dots scattered across a wide area. Each dot represented a piece of what had once been the soul's pride. Analysis, Jinsu said quietly. So-young's fingers danced across her control panel, and the dots began to move and reshape themselves. The debris pattern is consistent with a coordinated attack by multiple vessels, she reported. At least 6 ships, possibly more. They surrounded the Soul's Pride and fired simultaneously. The screen showed the attack as it must have happened. The peaceful civilian transport, loaded with families and children, suddenly finding itself surrounded by warships. Jinsu could imagine the terror of those final moments. Weapon signatures, he asked. Vorthak plasma cannons, So-young confirmed. High-energy discharge patterns matched their military-grade systems. This was not pirates, Captain. This was a Vorthak battle group. Jinsu nodded grimly. They had suspected as much, but confirmation still hit like a physical blow. 50,000 civilians murdered by the same species that now sat in the council chambers and joked about debris. Any survivors? He asked, though he already knew the answer. So-young shook her head. No life signs. No escape pods. No distress beacons. She paused, then added quietly. They made sure no one survived to tell the story. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Around them, the crew of the Busan's Shadow went about their duties with practiced efficiency. They were all volunteers for this mission, all specialists in gathering the kind of information that powerful people preferred to keep secret. Ma'am, called Ensign Tae-won from the communication station, I am detecting encrypted transmissions from the outer system. They are using Vorthak military frequencies. Jinsu felt his jaw tighten. Put it on speaker. The bridge filled with the harsh, grinding sounds of the Vorthak language. So-young worked quickly at her translation computer, and after a few moments, words began to appear on the screen. Patrol Group 7 to command, the translation read. Sector cleansing complete. No witnesses. The humans will not expand beyond their designated zone, another voice responded. Understood, Patrol Group 7, return to base. The Council has been informed that it was a pirate attack. Jinsu and his crew exchanged dark looks. Not only had the Vorthak murdered 50,000 civilians, but they had also coordinated their story with other Council members. This was not the action of a rogue military unit. This was official policy. Record everything, Jinsu ordered. Full spectrum analysis. I want every detail documented. As his crew worked, Jinsu opened a secure channel to Earth. The transmission would take several hours to reach home, bouncing through hidden relay stations and military networks that the Council did not know existed. Priority 1 message for Fleet Command, He spoke into the communicator. Captain Jinsu reporting. The Soul's pride was destroyed by Vorthak military forces in a coordinated attack. All souls lost. Evidence suggests Council involvement. Request immediate instructions. He closed the channel and looked around his bridge. Every face showed the same cold anger that he felt burning in his own chest. They had all joined the service to protect humanity, but for 3 years they had been forced to hide in shadows while their people were treated like children by alien powers. Sir, So Young said, her voice carefully controlled, I am detecting another transmission. This one is on silicon hegemony frequencies. The alien language that filled the bridge this time was different, a series of mathematical formulas and calculated tones. But the translation, when it came, was just as damning. Economic analysis complete, the silicon hegemony voice reported. Human expansion into Kepler 442 system would reduce Council mineral profits by 12.7%. Elimination of transport vessel maintains profitable status quo. Calculation confirmed, came the reply. Human population growth exceeding acceptable parameters. Additional containment measures may be required. Jinsu closed his eyes for a moment. It was worse than they had thought. This was not just about territory or resources. The Council saw humanity's growth as a threat to their power, and they were willing to commit genocide to stop it. Ma'am, Taewan called from his station. Incoming priority transmission from Earth. Jinsu moved to the captain's chair and accepted the message. Fleet Admiral Taemin's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim but determined. Captain Jinsu, the Admiral said without preamble, your report has been received and confirmed by multiple intelligence sources. The Council's actions constitute an act of war against humanity. Jinsu felt his heart rate increase. After 3 years of diplomatic games and polite requests, they were finally going to fight back. You are ordered to complete your intelligence gathering and return to Earth immediately, Admiral Taemin continued. Operation Reckoning is now active. All ghost ships are to rendezvous at coordinates you will receive separately. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Operation Reckoning was something they had all heard whispered about but never seen. It was humanity's response to exactly this kind of situation. So Young, Jinsu said quietly. How long to complete our scan of the debris field? 6 more hours, Captain. Maybe 8 if we want detailed analysis of the weapon signatures. Do it. I want irrefutable proof of what happened here. Jinsu stood and walked to the main view screen, looking out at the scattered remains of 50,000 human lives. When we present this evidence to the galaxy, I want there to be no doubt about who is responsible. As his crew worked, Jinsu thought about Ambassador Daeho standing in the council chambers, maintaining his polite smile while aliens laughed about human deaths. The ambassador had played his role perfectly for 3 years, pretending that humanity was weak and harmless and grateful for scraps. Soon, Jinsu thought, that performance would end. And when it did, the council would learn what humans were really capable of when their respectful mode finally turned off. The Busan shadow continued its silent vigil in the darkness, gathering evidence and preparing for war. Around them, space looked empty and peaceful, but appearances, as the council was about to learn, could be very deceiving. In the distance, barely visible even to their advanced sensors, other shapes moved in the darkness. Ships that did not officially exist, crewed by people who had never been born, carrying weapons that had never been built. The ghost fleet was gathering, and soon the galaxy would see humanity's true face. Jinsu smiled grimly as he watched the stars. The council thought they were dealing with naive children who could be bullied and controlled. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The quarterly trade negotiations always followed the same pattern. Humanity would make reasonable requests. The council would find reasons to deny them. Everyone would pretend it was about fairness and galactic stability. Today felt exactly like every other trade session, except for the tension that seemed to crackle in the air like electricity before a storm. Daeho stood at the central podium, his posture as perfect as always. His black suit was immaculate. His tie was straight. His hands rested calmly on the speaking platform. But Mira, watching from her position behind him, noticed small changes that others might miss. The way he held his shoulders was different. The rhythm of his breathing had changed. Most importantly, he had stopped smiling, not in an obvious way. His expression was still pleasant and diplomatic. But the warmth that had once been there, even when facing the worst insults, was gone. What remained was something colder, more precise, like a blade that had been sharpened to a perfect edge. "Honored council members," Deho began, his voice carrying the same respectful tone it always had. "Humanity requests expanded shipping routes through the Centauri corridor and mining rights in the Outer Rim territories. The request was reasonable, carefully researched, and backed by solid economic data. Humanity had prepared detailed presentations showing how these expanded operations would benefit not just them, but all council members through increased trade revenue. They had spent months making sure every detail was perfect. The council's response was as predictable as sunrise. War Prime Khazgul of the Vorthak Empire leaned forward in his seat, his clawed hands scraping against the metal armrests. "More expansion requests," he growled, his voice like grinding gears. "When will this species learn that the galaxy does not revolve around their desires?" Councillor Veltar of the Ethereal Collective floated in lazy circles, her ghostly form pulsing with condescending amusement. "Sweet little humans always reaching for more than they can grasp. Perhaps you should focus on managing what you already have instead of dreaming of greater things." Prime Unit 7 of the Silicon Hegemony flickered with calculated patterns that their species used for mathematical laughter. Analysis. Human species demonstrates persistent inability to accept appropriate limitations. Recommendation. Reduce current territories to encourage realistic expectations. Other council members joined in with their own versions of dismissal. The Aquatic Federation bubbled with what might have been mirth. The Hive Collective's 1,000 eyes blinked in synchronized patterns of contempt. The Rock Collective made grinding sounds that could have been either laughter or warning. Through it all, Deho stood quietly at the podium. His hands remained steady. His breathing remained calm. His expression remained diplomatically neutral. But Mira watched as something fundamental shifted in his posture. The change was so subtle that she almost missed it, but once she saw it, she could not look away. The respectful diplomat was still there, but something else was rising to the surface. Something that had been hidden for 3 long years of insults and condescension and casual cruelty. "Perhaps," Councillor Veltar continued in her musical voice, "humans need to learn their place in the galactic community. You are a young species. You should be grateful for what you have been given instead of constantly demanding more." War Prime Khazgul nodded his massive head in agreement. "Indeed. Your people seem to think they deserve the same privileges as species that have proven themselves over millennia. This attitude of entitlement is concerning. Concerning enough," added a new voice, "to require correction." The speaker was Zixthara, another Vorthak representative who rarely spoke in council sessions. Her presence here was unusual, and her words carried a weight that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Correction?" Deho asked, his voice still perfectly polite. Zixthara's compound eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. "Your transport ship that was destroyed in the Kepler 442 system last month. Consider it a lesson about the dangers of unauthorized expansion." The chamber fell completely silent. Not the comfortable quiet of beings listening to a speaker, but the deadly silence that comes when something terrible has just been said out loud. Mira felt her blood turn to ice. Hyunwoo, standing beside her, went rigid as a statue. Around the chamber, several council members exchanged glances that suggested they were not surprised by this revelation. Deho stood at the podium for a long moment without speaking. When he finally moved, it was to adjust his tie with slow, deliberate movements. Mira recognized the gesture. It was the signal they had been waiting for. But something was different this time. The signal was not just for her and Hyunwoo. It was for everyone. "I see," Deho said, his voice unchanged but somehow completely different. "Thank you for clarifying the situation." The words were polite. The tone was respectful. But every person in the chamber suddenly felt like they were standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into darkness. War Prime Khazgul seemed to sense that something had shifted, but he was too arrogant to recognize the danger. "Perhaps now your species will understand the importance of staying within designated boundaries," he said with obvious satisfaction. Deho nodded slowly. "We understand," he replied. "Perfectly." Mira watched as her ambassador's transformation accelerated. The diplomatic mask was still in place, but cracks were starting to show. Through those cracks, something else was becoming visible, something that had been waiting patiently for 3 years. If I may ask, Deho continued conversationally, how many other lessons has the Council arranged for humanity? Several Council members laughed at what they assumed was a naive question. Prime Unit 7 flickered with amusement. Calculation. Disciplinary actions have been minimal and appropriate to species development level. Of course, Deho said. Appropriate. He spoke the word like he was tasting something bitter. Around the chamber, a few of the more perceptive council members began to look uneasy. There was something in the human ambassador's tone that they had never heard before. Councillor Veltar floated serenely in her section, completely oblivious to the change in atmosphere. Really, Ambassador, you should be thanking us. These lessons help your species mature faster. Pain is often the best teacher. Pain, Deho repeated softly. Yes, it certainly is. For the first time in 3 years of diplomatic service, he did not immediately respond to a council statement. The silence stretched out, growing heavier with each passing second. Council members began to shift in their seats, suddenly uncomfortable without understanding why. Finally, Deho spoke again. His voice was still calm, still diplomatic, still respectful, but underneath those familiar tones, something else had awakened. Thank you all for this enlightening session, he said. Humanity has learned a great deal today. He bowed slightly, the same precise bow he had given hundreds of times before. But when he straightened, Mira saw that the diplomatic mask had finally cracked completely. What looked back at the council was no longer a respectful ambassador seeking permission and approval. It was something much older, much more dangerous, and much more human. We will be in touch very soon, Deho said, his smile returning for the first time in months. But this smile was nothing like the warm diplomatic expression he had worn before. This smile was sharp as a blade and cold as space. As they left the speaking platform, Mira heard whispered conversations breaking out among the council members. Some were laughing about the human tantrum. Others seemed confused by the change in atmosphere. A few, the wisest ones, looked genuinely worried. Walking back to their seats, Hyunwoo leaned close to Deho and whispered urgently, Sir, are we proceeding with the plan? Deho's smile grew wider, and for a moment, Mira saw something in his eyes that made her remember why other species in the galaxy had once feared humans, back before they learned to hide their true nature behind diplomatic politeness. Oh yes, he said quietly. We are definitely proceeding with the plan. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been completely silent before. Even during the most serious debates, there was always some sound, the whisper of air recycling systems, the soft hum of translation devices, the quiet movements of thousands of beings in their seats. But now absolute silence filled the space like a physical presence. Every screen in the chamber had activated at once, showing the same impossible sight. Stars filled with human warships, not the small patrol vessels that humanity was supposed to possess, but massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the council fleets. Thousands of them surrounding every major council world simultaneously. Deho stood at the central podium, but he was no longer the same person who had walked there minutes earlier. Gone was the respectful diplomat who had bowed and smiled and said please and thank you for 3 years. What remained was something that made every alien,